Well, for me, social justice is an issue that I have always been very close to my heart. And if I look back to my childhood, and I don't know if I go that far back, I always disliked seeing girls in school being mistreated. And there was lots of fights with boys. So I was well known in primary school to be the one who defended all the girls and fought off the guys, so the guys sort of feared me. But as I went into high school, what I found was that we went into a public school that had young people from across Kenya. I'm from Kenya. And many of them were from very poor backgrounds. And that bothered me a lot because I suddenly realized that here I was, had grown up in a privileged environment, and we're faced in this public school where so many people didn't have the right uniform, they didn't have clothes, they didn't have transport home, and so I was constantly bothering my parents and organizing people at school trying to figure out ways for us to provide for them. So I think it started quite early in my life that I started thinking about social justice. And I just hated also to see women carrying big, heavy loads of, you know, the usual beast of burden story. And so my whole career has been about really social justice. I have a son. I have 3 kids. Okay. So my son is now 16. And when he was about 10, when he was born, I was asking myself, how are we going to bring up a new generation of young Africans who are actually committed to Africa's journey and Africa's destiny? Because looking at what Western media is doing, my big fear always was, will we be able to shape a future generation of African leader who actually cares? And so when he was born, I started trying to figure out maybe what we could do is build African folklore. So I was looking for a media channel, but I wasn't sure which. And then when he was about 10, but then I worked for the UN, and so during that time I sort of pushed this whole idea to the side. But I was watching him once playing a game, and I was always challenging him to get off these games. And I kept saying, stop playing these games, eat your food, you know, you can't play this all the time, you're going to go crazy. And one day he says to me, Mommy, come and see Mansa Musa and Nelson Mandela on this game. So I go and watch him playing this game, and he starts telling me about Mansa Musa's story as the Empire of Mali and Songhai. And I was shocked because I thought in this South African context, they're not learning about this. And he says, look, Mommy, and suddenly I realized that this here is a tool that enables you to not just get this information, but interact with it and change it and actually create different outcomes for it. And so I started looking around the world to see what's going on, and I stumbled upon this Games for Change community and Games for Learning community in the US and in Europe and so on. And so I thought, well, hey, that's awesome. Let's try this. I was in Kenya at the time when there was an attempted coup. And I couldn't then attend the Nairobi University or university in Kenya. And I tried to go to university in the US and all these other places where everybody else was going. And my father said to me, no way. Cut a story short, I ended up at the University of Swaziland. But that's not really the shape. I mean, that sort of shaped me because I made a decision that was completely contrary to everybody else. But the big thing was that I arrived in Swaziland in 1983 at a time when the ANC were actually having their most volatile time, where the Umkhonto we Sizwe underground was operating in Swaziland. Largely out of the university, in fact. And so there was a big cell in the university. And so here I am, a foreign student. I've heard about South Africa sort of remotely. And all of a sudden I'm thrown into this context where within about 3 weeks of being there, I had met a couple of people one of whom was shot, you know, in my presence. We'd gone to say bye. He was on his way to Mozambique, and we were all there, a group of us, and you know, we had to take off because there was an attack, and he was riddled with 30 bullets. And so I had to make choices. My parents at the time wanted me to leave the country immediately, but I asked to stay for a little while and do my best. And so while I was there, I was asked on several occasions by friends and people who were working within the ANC to help with several missions that they needed to get done. And I did, and I was in the kind of position where I was able to do stuff that others couldn't do. So that shaped me a lot because I realized that, yeah, life is not all games. I think the one thing that I try the best to do is to talk to people all the time. believe that it's important to stay in touch with the people with whom you're engaged with. So, you know, I heard a beautiful quote the other day that I'd like to use. Leadership is a love affair with the people with whom you're leading. And so leadership for me is not just about leading an organization, but it's about leading a vision. And the vision that I have for Africa is that, in fact, in my lifetime, we can see the end of poverty and see prosperity. The second thing is that I read a lot, so I do my best to sort of keep up to date with what's going on. And, you know, it's great to have YouTube and the internet now, so you can keep in touch with a lot of new information. But I'm also quite spiritual, and I spend a lot of time in prayer, and I try to interact quite closely with people who are praying around discipling nations and transforming nations, and really looking at where the African continent is going. And then, you know, I have a very solid family behind me, and so my seeking balance within my family and friends is a very big story. And I exercise and I eat well and do my best to stay strong and healthy, because I think it's all part of the balance. And I've got inspirational leaders with whom I try my best to sort of stay in touch. Fred Swaneker is one of them. I think the first big lesson is entrepreneurship is not for sissies. But in terms of what I've tried, I actually started my entrepreneurial journey formally with Afros. However, within the United Nations as I worked, and within previous jobs that I worked, I was always pushing sort of entrepreneurial innovations within the organization. And it was, on several occasions, I found that it was actually impossible to do, because just the nature of the bureaucracy and the sort of what was in my head and what I believed was possible, I was unable to mobilize enough people within the organization to sort of buy into this vision. I mean, within Afros, we've had failures, you know. I started out with a vision that assumed that we could do big games, big Xbox console games. And, you know, very early after I went searching for money and looking for all kinds of support, I realized quickly two things. One, that's not where young people are. And so that's the wrong, the young Africans are. So that's the wrong platform. The second thing was that investors were saying to me, who are you and why do you think we should be investing this kind of money in you? And so I had to take a very big step back and start rethinking. And when we did the research, mobile was like, duh, there's no other platform that you would go for but this. So we changed tack completely. And you know, even as we go along, I don't know if I would call myself yet a successful entrepreneur. I sort of smile when people say that. And in my mind, this is just an amazing journey. It's just an amazing journey. It's a journey where you just persevere. You've got to believe and have the passion and commitment that this thing can happen, that in fact we can shift the mindsets of young Africans using mobile technology and gaming. The point that I'd like to make is that progress is not shaped by blueprints, right? We have looked up at many different organizations and many different leaders as the people who will solve the problem. Mandela is one very unique guy. On this Mandela Day, he's a very unique guy, but there are many other unique guys who are out there. And any one of these young people can be a Mandela if you just believe enough that it's possible to do something differently, and that you don't buy into the concept that this is a blueprint and that if you follow this particular route, that this is the route that's going to take you there. You know, we all suffered from our own parents and our parents' generation's view that you were only successful if you were a lawyer, an economist. You know, entrepreneurship was just something that you did because you were a failure. I remember laughing at a friend of mine because we finished college together, and then she started a boutique. And I was like, but that's what people do who don't have jobs, who don't have degrees. You know, so I've had to shift my own mindset about that. And so for young people, the sky is the limit. The opportunities that are available, Africa is rising. There are new opportunities and new platforms and environments that you can break new ground. And it's time to sort of rethink those platforms. Entrepreneurship, and in particular for me, social entrepreneurship, is an amazing platform. It's a platform that I think Africa is only awakening to it now. There isn't enough support for it, but it's growing. It's growing, and it's a place where if young people could really, really begin to explore new ways of doing things on a constant basis, challenge yourself. How do we do things differently? How do we learn from where others have been? What are the what are the future trends that we can shape into to be able to actually create a different platform and a different way of doing business?